You know, many years ago, some rabbis, maybe 2,000 years ago, they lived under the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire was not very kind in those days, particularly to the Jewish people. It hadn't yet, that was before Rome converted to Christianity and all in its later development, but Rome was a pretty tough regime. And one was saying, look at the wonderful roads which the Romans have built, the bridges and so on and so forth. And the other rabbi said, what did they build those roads for? What were those squares built for? But to make houses which were not moral. What were those bridges for? But to extort unreasonable tolls. We're hearing so much about, I don't want to put you on the spot, we're hearing so much about roads. The question is, where do these roads lead? Where do it's all very well to talk about the material infrastructure of a society, but human beings, they have a moral infrastructure. What about that?
Yeah, well, I guess you're right. And I mean, all these material things are very important. And as a party, we pride ourselves on good economic management and those sort of things. And I think they're very important. I mean, as a state government, that's what we need to do. But you're also right, there's a moral side to this. And I guess that's when you look at legislation like this is why we're taking such a line on this, saying no. People deserve the right. People have the right. And in fact, in the Western world, we have freedom of religion. We think that this legislation is very, very important to making sure we actually continue to have that here in Victoria. People have the right to have a moral ground on different things, but also to meet together as a faith community. Whatever that faith community is, that's a right. Right. And we think it's important.
Very often faith-based institutions and individuals view the media with a lot of frustration, because the media views the election in terms which conform with their interests, the way they see the world. And what this is doing is actually driving faith-based movements to grassroots level. Now, this won't be registered in the net. It won't be registered maybe in the media until the media sees what the grassroots has actually accomplished. But do you think that it's going to come to a surprise to the media when they see a grassroots reaction to this suppression of very basic cultural needs?
Well, I think what is interesting is if you read the media, you would think, in fact, that no one has any faith background. Yet when you look at the census statistics, it's actually 22% say they have no faith at all. It's not the majority. And when you look at that 22%, it's actually only a very small minority of them that are actively campaigning against any religious activity. So the overwhelming number of Victorians actually classify themselves as having a faith. And I think that probably answers your question in the sense of we do, as a community, have a spiritual side, and we do, as a community, think that's important. When we fill out our census forms, we do tick some sort of religious affiliation.
Well, we see it. Obviously, there may be societies which are more religious, societies which are certainly less religious than ours. But what I'm hearing in many sides is a sense that there will be a backlash at grassroots level. And when and how this emerges, we don't know. I mean, there are many groups which are working hard during this election to circulate these issues at grassroots level. But it's difficult. How do you think that these issues can be managed when the media seems to be so concentrated and so partisan?
Well, I guess when I go around to a lot of forums and I meet a lot of people in my large electorate, and there's actually quite a grassroots movement already on these issues. People do make the choice to send their children to faith-based schools. They do. People do choose to go to a synagogue or a church on the weekend. They do choose to do this, and often these people are a bit quieter, not quite as active as maybe people who are against these issues, but they're real, they're there, the census shows us that they're there. And I think that it's important that people are aware of this issue. It's extremely important that people are aware of this issue, and I guess they've got to make a choice. We have clear differences of opinion on this issue.
Well, I think many of us in the faith communities are going to see this as a battle over the foundations of our society, and this Equal Opportunity Act amendment, which is being proposed, I think it raises the question of whether we're going to stand up for the first of the Ten Commandments. And because if the society wants to demolish the mechanism by which the first of the Ten Commandments is actually perpetuated, taught, which is the belief in God, which is what the faith-based schools want to do, and presumably also religious programs in state schools, then this is something for which people will take a stand. You cannot touch a deeper nerve in human beings than their faith. And they will stand up for it at some point. It will not go away. So I do hope that the media will listen to this and will be wary of it well in advance of the surprise which they may receive from grassroots if they don't.
Well, I guess from my perspective, one of the great things about Victoria and Australia is we have a democratic system.
Right.
I think that faith-based people need to be aware of this issue. They need to be very aware of this issue when they go to the ballot box this week, whether it be during the week, whether it be Saturday, to be aware that this is a big issue. This could change dramatically faith-based schools, faith-based organisations. But as a Liberal Party, we're committed to the current legislation with no changes.
So how do you think things would be were some of the small parties to get in the upper house? And I'm not talking about the Greens, I'm talking about the more traditional small parties like the DLP, the Australian Christians, Family First. Now, do you think that the presence in the upper house of parties like this would actually tow politics back closer to the centre? In other words, from where out of which they've been pulled, let's say, by the Greens. In other words, the concept of conscience vote is a very strange conscience vote. Sometimes the word conscience suggests something higher. Conscience, on the other hand, can mean something optional.
Sure.
You vote this way, you vote that way. But it's interesting what comes up as a conscience vote and what doesn't come up as a conscience vote. I mean, I can understand it could split certain parties, that's why you have a conscience vote. Yes. But we've got to know, the whole question is what's outside the pale and what's not, what's up for options and what's not up for options. Do you think that a new conservative element in the upper house might just change the whole political horizon such that certain options won't even be entertained?
Look, I think that really what Victorians want is state government. I think that we've seen federally what happens when the minor parties get in, and this is not a reflection of any of the particular parties you've just mentioned. Some of them have some good conservative values on the issues you've talked about, but I think that what Victorians need more than anything is stable government. I think that, in all honesty, minor parties have not shown that that is the best way to go. I think that the Victorian community is intelligent, and I think they'll look at stable government, and I think probably personally I would think that is a better way to go.
But on the other hand, just for the other side of the picture, we saw how a small party, what was once a small party, the Greens, how they were able to polarise to some extent, to change the language and the choices. Now, what's going to offset that? In other words, what's going to make it acceptable, for example, for the Liberal Party to take a more traditional view? In other words, instead of, I know parties are always looking for the centre. There's a kind of political equilibrium, and you're obviously maximising your vote. What's going to pull the Liberal Party back, so to speak, to its more traditional socially conservative standpoint?
Well, I think when you look at the Liberal Party, I think the legislation we're talking about today is a great example of that. I think, we talk about the Equal Opportunity Act. Here is the party saying no. We want this freedom to exist. So I think that when you talk about these issues, I think the Liberal Party is actually very strong on these issues. I see this legislation itself as probably a great testament to how strong we are on these issues.
Well, I thank you very much for talking with us, and I think we have to agree that this one issue alone couldn't be a more fundamental issue, because this issue has to do with the transmission of that culture upon which our society stands. And if that's attacked, then we're up for a very serious cultural struggle. And why it would be nice to be spared that pain for everybody's sake. and it's not a threat on my part that I can't, but people will stand up for their principles. There's no question about it. Faith is the most enduring fact of human history. You can't do away with it. It came back from the Soviet Union, it came back in China. You can't repress faith. So the idea that you can neutralise it, disarm it, dismantle it, is something which is really, really worrying.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Good to speak with you.